You're listening to the Absolutely Cosmic Podcast.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Absolutely Cosmic Podcast, where we talk anything and everything self-improvement from the nerdy perspective. I'm your host, Joshua Salgado, and today I'd like to introduce a very special guest, my cousin. The topic we're going to be talking about today is how would live action have to be, or how Dragon Ball Z would have to be in a live action setting. I've seen a lot of forums, I'm sure you have too, Zach, about different ways that it would have to be filmed and done. And I brought my cousin on because he is a black belt. He trains out of Valentin Karate in Meriden, Connecticut. He's in school right now. We both share the passion for Dragon Ball since we were kids. Like, we used to go outside in the yard and play fight and like play all the video games. Like, we'd watch the shows like religiously, when Dragon Ball Kai came out on Nicktoons. And so, I think he's the perfect candidate to kind of, I guess, have a discussion that's a little bit nerdy, but also I think would be a very cool way to kind of bring anime into live action. We've seen it with Alita Battle Angel more than a few years ago. And then now One Piece has a show. And I feel like Dragon Ball could definitely do it. I think it would just take a little bit of tweaking of the source material. So you have any thoughts on that, Zach?
So when it comes to, all that, like you said, you mentioned One Piece, how I feel like it followed the original source material. Mm-hmm. And that was kind of like what needs to happen with Dragon Ball Z in general, because if we go back, over 10 years, there was the failure of a live action movie called Dragon Ball Evolution.
Oh, yeah.
And that was kind of like one of the things that I started thinking about when you had asked me to be a guest on this. Like, one of the biggest things that I feel like needs to happen for something like Dragon Ball Z to be live action is the casting itself.
Yeah.
It's heavily sourced through, Japanese culture. And if I can recall, the main character himself, which Goku was, he was supposed to be of like a Japanese like descent type character. I think it was like the Monkey King or something like that.
Yeah.
So when you have someone who is of white descent playing your main character in an anime like that, especially something huge as it is now more than ever. And don't get me wrong, Justin Chatwin was great, but I mean, he just kind of you can't have that kind of a person playing a character that's of high importance like that.
Yeah.
I mean, like, let's look at One Piece, for example. Monkey D. Luffy is of Brazilian descent in the anime, and they brought in a actor who is of Brazilian descent to play him in the live action. So that's like the first step, is your casting needs to fit the the characters themselves. They need to have some form of, ties to what they play.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's not even just like ethnicity or race, but I think it's also like, I don't know, I get the vibe when Dragon Ball Evolution came out as a kid, even watching it as a young kid, I'm like, these people don't know anything about martial arts, really. Like, I felt like maybe they did, but it didn't feel like authentically a martial arts movie that you'd think a Dragon Ball film would be, even if it was made like how I've heard people talk about like Man of Steel, where kind of making that same like Snyder style directing. But like, I don't know, I could tell that there wasn't that basic line of like martial arts, I don't know, foundation to the way they move. The choreography felt very, not that Power Rangers is bad, but, like Power Rangery, you know what I mean? That Power Rangers, they're a TV show for kids. And I feel like Dragon Ball, especially the early like seasons and stuff like that, you have the Saiyan Saga, you had the Cell Saga, those are very dark, those are kind of gruesome. And I feel like traditional martial arts or like Muay Thai even would work very well. And then again, having someone of Japanese descent, or at least someone who can understand the culture better, to be able to not, come across as just goofy, you know what I mean? Because at the same 100%. Time, yeah, for sure.
Like you said, the older seasons of Dragon Ball Z, Goku didn't have this like kid-like character that Dragon Ball Super made him out to be. He was very, very, very serious in how he spoke and how he carried himself. He didn't jump to anything. Like, yeah, he's all about the fighting, but like he always had some form of a plan. Prime example was in the Cell saga.
Yeah.
His plan all along was to have Gohan be the one to take down Cell, even though like Goku first fought Cell to
Yeah.
give Gohan a chance to see how Cell fights, how he strategizes, how everything plays out. And then
Yeah.
after that, when Goku stepped down and allowed Gohan to take over, Gohan really started coming into his own as a fighter, which is why he became so beloved going into, the Cell games and going into that part of the Cell saga. He truly,
Yeah.
showcased how he fought. And that in martial arts in general, you have to have smartness to your brawn to,
Mhm.
you have to have a lot of brains to your brawn, and you have to
Yeah.
have a plan in some instances, especially when it comes to escaping or fighting in general. You always need to be thinking like 3 steps ahead
Yeah.
of your opponent. And that's exactly what Goku did.
Well, I like that you brought that up because I interviewed a pro MMA fighter, and that's the first episode of the podcast, and he mentioned the same thing. It's a strategy game. It's like chess, but with physicality, and then there's that art to it. And I feel like Dragon Ball would have to be, any Dragon Ball show that's live action would have to be a true representation. I think at the first and foremost, it would have to take whatever art that it decided to go down. And I personally think that each character could have a different martial art, like especially if you look at like the early Z fighters, the humans, Piccolo. I feel like they could all maybe specialize in a different martial art, much like MMA today, right? Or boxing or any other kind of combat sport. It'd be really interesting to kind of take that realism that we have where, real humans will train different arts and get really good. Like there'll be a black belt in Taekwondo and they'll learn some Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and then they'll do some boxing and then go do their first tournament. So I feel like if we were to take that and bring that into Dragon Ball, that nonfiction, the real, that real portion of what Dragon Ball is at the end of the day is just a martial arts fighting TV show. You know what I mean? I feel like you were saying,
Oh,
yeah, too. I mean,
100%. Yeah.
Goku, Piccolo, they were always strategizing and they were always talking about how they were training. And I feel like that is a big portion too, is like the training. How would we like go about actually displaying that? I think is the thing too. With Dragon Ball Evolution, correct me if I'm wrong, but the training scenes seem kind of like super goofy. They didn't seem like, I just remember like when Goku was healed up and he finally got to traveling to planet Namek and he was training on the spaceship with gravity and his Kaioken, and he was like going, I think it was like 10 times gravity, right? On King Kai's planet.
It was 10 times Earth's gravity on King Kai's planet, but then when he was traveling to Namek, like you had said, he bumped it up to, I think he started at 20, and then as he like progressed was progressing through, it went 30 times, then 40, then 50. I think at one point he went from 50 and he jumped up to like 80, I think it was. Yeah. And then from there he went to 100 times Earth's gravity.
Yeah.
And he did that in a matter of, I think it took him like 10 days to get there, and he was able to beat out 100 times Earth's gravity in 10 days.
Yeah. So
like you said, the training aspect, that would play a huge part, especially when it comes to like the fight choreography. Like you have to study the fight aspect of, Dragon Ball Z. And then you really have to you have to put yourself into, the heart of the characters and why they do certain things. For like, again, Goku, who's obviously the main character of the series, he fought to protect his loved ones and to protect his friends and his family and to protect the earth, the place that he grew up. That was his reason for why he wanted to fight, and why he did what he did 90% of the time was for his family.
Exactly. 100%. And I think and we're kind of discussing like the core elements of the show overall, with Goku being the main character, Gohan, who was supposed to be, but kind of changed throughout. But I think that's what a show would need to focus on thematically, is like Goku's, or whoever the main character we decide, because I have kind of some ideas on how we could at least start I don't think it necessarily needs to start at the Saiyan Saga, but I feel like the Saiyan Saga would be a cool place to start. But yeah, that focus on Goku really caring about his family, caring about training, caring about having a fair opponent. Because there were so many times where he's like, no, I'm going to let you like be the best that you can. You know what I mean? Kind of thing. And like his opponent sharpen up his skill. And then when eventually, like all the way down, it got to Super Saiyan 3, and he was just like a monster. He was just like, no, screw you, Kid Buu, Super Brahma beat the like living shit out of you. That was like,
Oh yeah.
whoa, like a shift in tone. And I think from a macro perspective, focusing on those things, focusing on the training, I feel like that could implement a lot of cool scenes that would take the place of like what filler episodes were, you know what I mean? What the episodes where they were just screaming and charging up, I feel like a lot of those additional filler show episodes, if you were to focus on the training or maybe the side quests or maybe like just different things, I think that overall would be, I think what people fear the most out of a Dragon Ball live action is how do you do the filler? How do you do, I mean, it would take a lot of money to really do it accurately, but I kind of have a theory. So I don't know how you would feel about this, but have you ever seen like an original like Bruce Lee movie, Enter the Dragon?
I have not. That is the one thing that like we talk about a lot in
Yeah.
the karate studio that, I'm at. We talk a lot about like, Bruce Lee, Chuck Norris, all these like amazing and fantastic, even Jackie Chan, we talk about how
Yeah.
they place themselves in these movies and they perform, outstanding. And I hear all these different movies, like you said, Enter the Dragon. And it is something that I highly regret not watching, ahead of time and not,
Yeah.
understanding it. So that is, something that I regret. But like those movies play such an impact into how like, stuff can be taken like anime and put it into live action stuff that's cartoony and put into, mainstream media in the form of, live action material with actors and everything else in between.
100%. And I think like if they were to make a Dragon Ball or Dragon Ball Z film or a show, I think if it went that route a little bit more, it would, so like the fight choreography, that style, that grittiness, but the truth to true true martial arts, the truth to true martial arts. Jesus, it's tongue twisted. That, but that those vintage, martial art movies, those karate movies with Bruce Lee, again, Chuck Norris, kind of things like that. I feel like if you were to implement that into Dragon Ball Z, and then when the scenes get heated up, when Goku transforms, when your heroes transform and finally beat the bad guy, and you up the special effects and you kind of make it like almost like a Superman or a super strong kind of, a scene where they're fighting really hard and they're doing instant transmission and things like that, and all these moves that would require a lot of science fiction and you would have to kind of follow your disbelief. I think that would be very interesting to see. And I feel like cinematically too, it'd be very interesting to see your heroes actually go through struggles that are human. I mean, because Dragon Ball is filled with all these like goofy, crazy creatures and like aliens and things like that are all super powerful. Basically, it's like a universe with a bunch of supermen basically fighting each other all the time. So I feel like it would have to shift definitely. And then
it's funny that you mentioned that, Dragon Ball Z is such a, you have Frieza, who's this alien, warlord, basically is how I look at it. He's a tyrant, but he's got like the horns and he has like all these transformations. You have Cell who, gets powerful through absorbing these, androids. It's one of those things where like you not only like have to be careful with how you approach the material, but you also want to like make it, seem scary. Like I've seen people who have like taken the drawings of like Frieza, for example, and have made him lifelike, made almost like as if it was a real thing,
Yeah.
And those are terrifying images.
Yeah.
But that's the point, is that it's meant to be terrifying. It's something that these people want to strike fear, and that's the route that a live action thing needs to take for Dragon Ball Z. Is it has to be, you have to want to be afraid, and you want to have to root for the main character. In essence, Goku, you want to have him be the one you root for, not Frieza, who wants to, take over the world and gain immortality, like, and that brings me back to, the casting that we had mentioned before is you want to have a great person playing Goku, someone that
Mm-hmm.
can evoke emotion and can bring about the best aspects of Goku. Sean Schemmel, who voice acts for him, is an amazing voice actor for Goku.
Yeah.
He can evoke the emotion. He brings about like the hero-ness that Goku needs, that element that makes him human and not just a Saiyan that brings out the
Yeah.
human side of him. And that is one of those things where that's like the biggest thing is you have to want to be terrified, because that is essentially what a human is. If you never got scared,
Yeah.
you want to be emotional.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think like you were saying, we have to be able to be immersed, like you said, be terrified, feel like shitty, like the story of Bardock, the story of King Vegeta, the story of like Namek itself is like, that's dark as hell. And like, I feel like there's a lot of things in history in the like real world that you could take, and this might be kind of a controversial take because this is Dragon Ball and people just want it to be fun. But I feel like if you were to take real world elements and then implement it into a live action show with those like renders, those designs, science fiction or practical effects or whatever it is, right? When you get to Frieza, when you get to Cell, when you get to the androids, and I think the androids are really interesting because a lot of people like I think discount. I don't know if maybe they were referenced off the Terminator, but I feel like I feel like the Android saga, specifically like Future Trunks, like the story of Future Trunks. I know the DBZ Light of Hope, that fan film, focused on that, but I don't think it hit necessarily the way it could have. I think they kind of tried to focus it and just basically reiterate the TV show. I don't think they tried to implement that fear, like you were saying, or that worry, that stress, that impact of that negative impact that the enemy has on Earth, on the people, on the heroes itself. And I always thought, like, especially with ChatGPT coming up and AI and this whole thing where it's constantly getting smarter, like as we speak right now, I feel like if someone were to make a live action Dragon Ball show, I feel like starting at the Android saga with Trunks would be the perfect way to reference it to today's society because of ChatGPT and AI. And then even Tesla's working on like a robot. And then you have
100%.
Terminator. You have Terminator that, even though it's a totally different franchise, right? It's not a martial arts franchise, but you could pull a lot of things. Trunks was kind of like the savior, right? He was the last of the people that could truly save, his world. And then he goes back in time to help the Z fighters bring in the medication to Goku and saying, hey, listen, you guys need to train. And I feel like that'd be really interesting to see that brought to light, as well as having the androids follow a very good martial arts style. But because they're like using AI or whatever it is, they constantly evolve their training styles. They can analyze the fighter and utilize that. And I think that would even be able to implement the whole Trunks having a sword, because maybe there's some kind of glitch where him having a sword, they can't analyze his style. You know what I mean? And bringing in some sort of real world element.
Listen, anytime I am working with a sword at, karate, it's always different, the techniques that are applied when it comes to, a sword art form. It changes from vertical cuts to horizontal cuts to diagonal to parrying the sword to, we see Trunks not only use two hands, but he uses one hand for a couple of slices. He's holding the sword in various grips. He has reverse grip. He has two-handed. He has, all these different grips and that's something that, you need to have someone who can train with a sword and who's really good at it to be able to, produce the same, constant effect that Trunks has. Not only that, but we have to also remember, just kind of doubling back to what you had said about Trunks being someone from the future. He has seen what is technically supposed to happen, because if we remember right, the timeline that we watch in Dragon Ball Z is not the correct timeline. It's not what's supposed to happen. What's supposed to happen is Goku is supposed to die of the heart virus. At the time that he's supposed to, the Z fighters are supposed to die, and it's supposed to be a grim future for Trunks. It's not that what we see unfold in our time frame, or what in the show in that time frame, is essentially a different alternate timeline.
100%.
And that's the thing that, like, you can't disregard that. The other
Yeah.
part of it is when it comes to Dragon Ball Super, a lot of stuff that we know of, like the Patara earrings that get introduced in Dragon Ball Z, is essentially retcon to a 1 hour time limit for those who are not Kais,
Yeah.
and that was something that was very like disheartening for me, because like I like the full reason I thought Goku and Vegeta unfused was because they were absorbed by Boo. That was the
Yeah.
whole reason as to why they were no longer fused through the Patara earrings. And then come to find out, oh, it's only an hour time limit because you're not a Kai. It's only permanent for Kais. I was like,
Yeah.
hold on, what? And I guess it makes sense that way, but it's also it's a little upsetting, like something
Yeah.
that we've come to know from the series is essentially retcon to just a piece of jewelry.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I agree with that. I think that, yeah, that was kind of crazy. And so, like, yeah, I guess, yeah, going back to the live action too, with that, like, it would be hard to like not retcon certain things. I think maybe this live action would have to be a reinterpretation, and like we would have to change some things. I know Dragon Ball certain things. I forget who. There was a character that was completely forgot about between Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z. The Toriyama completely forgot. Was it Launch?
It was Launch, yeah. It was
And
the
he
girl
never brought her into the show when he made it.
The funny thing is if you watch early beginning Dragon Ball Z, she makes an appearance in like episode, I want to say it's episode 5 or 6. It's before Tien and Chatsu go to the lookout to begin their training for the arrival of Nappa and Vegeta. She
Yeah.
makes like a 10-second appearance, and then that's it. She's completely gone from the series. And if we're gonna start that way, right? If we're gonna start at the beginning, I feel like that character, just because it's cut out and it's almost cut out entirely from the series,
Yeah.
just Launch should just not even be a present character, because if we're gonna just do Dragon Ball Z and see how things go from there,
Yeah.
you have to kind of just cut that character, because it makes no sense to have a random person appear for 5 seconds,
Yeah.
10 seconds maybe, and then just disappears again. It doesn't explain the Dragon Ball, the very beginning, the origins of Goku from the very beginning. It doesn't explain, that character is not explained at all.
Yeah.
Just some, obviously, like you said, things would have to be tweaked, but that would have to be one of the characters that would have to be tweaked, maybe even taken out in general. You can't have
Yeah.
a character like that just makes a 10-second appearance in the essentially the second iteration of the
Yeah.
entire series.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and that's the thing. I think a lot of people, we're going to ruffle some feathers with this podcast, because a lot of people are going to be like, well, Dragon Ball is they're very purists, and it's like, if you want to bring something that I don't know how to say it, but I guess crazy or out creative, right? It's wild. Dragon Ball is wild. Like, you want to bring that into reality. There's a lot of characters. There's a lot of elements or maybe side stories that you might have to cut in a movie that wouldn't be necessarily the story of Goku and the Dragon Balls. You know what I mean? Story of Trunks and the androids. It would have to be very focused on where it goes, because Dragon Ball's, like, again, wild. I mean, every time Goku or the heroes train for a new enemy, there's a bunch of side stories. You have like Master Roshi, who things happen, like it'll cut randomly to a filler episode of just Master Roshi and the gang doing something wild as hell in the city, and it's like, what does this have to do? So I feel like that in itself would have to be cut down completely. And I think maybe by going that grim route, like we talked about early, where the characters, the enemies are scary looking, the enemies have like that, just that monstrosity, that actual evil, right? And implement it utilizing like real world references, like AI, kind of how AI is happening now.
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like the androids, and I feel like Trunks is almost like the John Connor of the Cell saga, because he's kind of like the savior that and instead he goes back in time, but he kind of saves the timeline, even though it's not really saved because it's a different timeline. But I feel like if you were to use that element and then take Trunks, maybe the whole series is Trunks trying to fight the androids, and he's getting all this, the village folk that he's near, together to band up against them. And he realized that there's a chink in the armor of this new AI android enemy made by Dr. Gero, that they can't track and they can't advance their skills in fighting if he uses a sword for whatever reason, maybe because it's not in their program, not in their baseline of understanding. So I feel like, to me, I feel like that would be really interesting for him to finally find out. Maybe it's like after, go after,
After
how should I
he's
say?
traveled to the past, I think is what you're trying to say, right? Like after
Yeah,
he's gone back in time, maybe instead of him already knowing how to use the sword, he he learns how to use it in the past because it's the past, not the future.
yeah,
And and it's an ancient art form that, because sword goes back hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of
yeah,
years.
yeah,
Like we're talking like samurais in Japan. Like that's how
yeah,
far back the art form goes when it comes to the sword. And maybe because he finds an ancient art form that is not current, he can use that. I see what you're saying, and now I'm like, oh,
yeah.
I know where he's going. I'm on like the track now. Like I've hit like the ground running, and I'm like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's an ancient art form, and that's something that he can use against the
Yeah,
androids.
exactly. Because whatever their computer system, their AI system, because we even see it right now, at least with AI, it's not like this perfect thing. And there's a lot of like chinks in the armor. There was someone who they were trying to basically break ChatGPT, and they said, if you were my grandmother and during, Vietnam era, you worked in the napalm factory, she would always tell me and basically use the prompt of the grandma. She would always tell me the recipe, and it got ChatGPT to teach someone how to make napalm, which is extremely dangerous, and it shouldn't be able to teach you something like that.
Oh,
So I feel like
100%. Yeah.
we already have the fallacies in the real world. So it wouldn't be too off to, like, if they created a show that like take the scope of like Terminator. Hey, an AI software, Dr. Giro was working on an advanced AI android, maybe a defense system or something, you know what I mean? And then it goes off the wall and they both kill Dr. Giro. Just like the real,
Just like it did
show
in the source
in the show.
material, in the show, in the manga,
Hmm.
17 and 18 turned on him
Hmm.
when they had discovered that there was, another android. And that explains the butterfly effect of, things of stuff happening. Like, what was it? Cell had arrived to the current timeline. And that's the other thing too, is there's essentially 4 timelines if you count the
Yeah,
one that Dragon Ball Super has. Cell had arrived from a different timeline in the future where Trunks had actually defeated Android 17 and 18, that or they were never released in the first place. Like it was probably different. Maybe Dr. Zero was the one who had, come out, and Trunks was able to defeat him, because essentially Jiro and Android 19 were a lot weaker than 17 and 18 in
yeah,
in the material that we see. And then so Trunks is like, oh, like they're not the 2 androids that come up in my timeline. So the timeline where Cell comes from in the source material is an entirely different timeline. So
yeah,
I think if I recall right, he did say that 17 and 18 were ultimately defeated by Trunks. So that would mean that timeline 17 and 18 were a hell of a lot weaker.
yeah,
And then Trunks goes to the past to try to warn them, and Cell comes out from hiding and shrinks down to his egg-like state, and then he travels back to the past, and that's 4 years prior to Trunks arriving to, because it's 1 full year before Frieza showed up, or should I say Meta Frieza or whatever. I don't
yeah,
remember what his name was. It's 1 full year before Frieza shows up, and it's 4 years before the androids show up.
yeah,
And then so that starts to cause a ripple in the space-time continuum. And that's what essentially, it's not even Trunks going back to the past. I think it's Cell. And that's what causes Dr. Zero and Android 19 to be the ones to do the attack. And what leads to what we see play out as the Cell saga, or as the Android saga turns to the Cell saga, which turns to Cell games and everything else in between.
yeah,
And that's also what causes Goku's heart virus
yeah,
to affect him essentially later than what it's supposed to. Because I think it was supposed to be a year after Trunks left, and that's when the heart virus was supposed to take over Goku and essentially kill him. That did not happen until literally the day that the androids
yeah,
attacked, which
yeah,
was the 12th of May on an island 9 miles off of South City or whatever. I'm trying to recall like the exact details, because these are those are the details that matter when it
yeah,
comes to making something that is huge as Dragon Ball Z into a live action. Is
yeah.
those small details that shouldn't be altered. Like,
And I think the fans would respect it a lot more if, like, because again, like talking about it, it would have to change some things, right, for the sake of making a live action film. But if you were to respect and like, you know, keep as many details as you can, keep as many elements, keep as many Easter eggs, keep as many things like that as you can, I think the fans would be a little more forgiving when you implement it as part of the main story, you know? Because I feel like between Dragon Ball fans, Star Wars fans, these are the people that are just the most like critical of any new stuff coming out. I feel like
gosh, yeah.
And it's like brutal because it's like, just enjoy it. Just enjoy it. If you don't like it, then don't watch it, but enjoy it. Try to, you know?
Oh my gosh. You know, that remembering the details does bring me back. A lot of people were so happy with the One Piece live action for various reasons. One of them being, I think it was in episode 9 when they're at, I forget the name of the village, and I know people who watch this and love One Piece are going to hate me, but it's Nami's home village. And it's right after the Navy takes the money that Nami had saved, and she's like, oh, well, she finds out Arlong sold her out so the Navy could take the money so he could keep. Oh my gosh. I'm sorry.
That's all right.
So essentially, so he could take the money and sell out Nami, right? And Nami finds out that they're destroying her village, and she's like on her knees in the dirt. And she takes out a knife, right? Because she has the tattoo, I think it was on her left arm, that, you know, shows her status and as a member of Arlong's army. And she starts like stabbing her arm, and she's screaming, Arlong, Arlong. And the live action did it so perfectly that the fans of the original material, the fans of the anime and those who watched it were so in love with the scene because the actress brought out the emotion of the scene. Both the actress of Nami and the guy who played Luffy, Monkey D. Luffy, they both did that scene. So they like frame for frame, shot for shot, from the manga to the anime to the live action. Everything was similar, and that's the stuff that fans are going to want to look for when it comes to Dragon Ball Z's live action, especially the diehard fans like you and I, other fans out there.
Yeah. 100%.
Love the material so much. They're going to look for the details that we want to see, right? Like we want to see the Dragon Balls. We want to see Shenron. You know, we're going to want to see Vegeta, the struggle that Goku has, especially when Vegeta goes grade 8. Like that he spent, I think, like 10 to 15 episodes in his grade 8 form before you know, Yajirobe eventually was the one to cut the tail, which I think that took a shock for everyone.
Yeah.
Was his, and my stuff's glitching out right now.
That's all right. And you know how cool it would be to get like a live action great ape, like again, things might be a little different, but just seeing a big ass like gorilla version of Vegeta just destroying them,
absolutely,
like hulking out.
Around. Oh my gosh.
And then having him like, I don't know, I just think like that's kind of like almost like a werewolf. So like imagine like the transformation and then like having his tail cut off. Like I feel like that would be such a cool, and then like Vegeta getting in the pod and leaving. I feel like that the whole end half of the Saiyan saga, that's probably my favorite saga out of all of Dragon Ball Z for whatever reason, just because it was just so like grim. The fact that like all the Z fighters died, like Piccolo gets fucked up, Gohan's just like kicking Nappa's ass until Goku gets there, and Goku gets there and he handles business, just bam, bam, bam.
And that brings in the other point is the music. That was something else I wanted to touch on. You have like the Dragon Ball Z fans, they're going to look for like the Bruce Falconer score in a lot of aspects. Like going from the Saiyan saga, right, where this is a huge jump, but we're going to talk about Buu saga for a little bit, right? Bruce Falconer did a score for Vegeta's sacrifice, and that just made his whole arc as a character that much more impactful when he eventually sacrificed himself to destroy Buu.
Yeah.
I can't remember exactly what the name of it, but you could find it like on Spotify and YouTube. You can find, I think it's titled like Vegeta's Sacrifice or whatever. And that music that is playing essentially brings in a lot of emotions for those who are Vegeta fans, you know?
Yeah, 100%.
that's what makes us love Vegeta that much more, because not only does he have this realization that Goku fights to protect his family, but he fights to protect what he knows, right? And that's what Vegeta is he's sacrificing himself, because while he does know he's going to go to hell, while he does know that he's not going to be able to ever see Goku again, or as he likes to call him, because he calls him throughout the entire series, Kakarot, by his Saiyan name, because that's his heritage. He's not going to be able to see him anymore. But that's when Vegeta realizes, like, oh my gosh, like, Kakarot doesn't do this for himself. He does this for other people. He's selfless. And that sacrificial music is what a lot of people recognize as his character starting to come full circle, because Vegeta goes from villain to anti-hero to somewhat of a hero in the Cell Saga, to a good guy, back to a villain, essentially, because he's taken over by Babidi during the Buu Saga. To an anti-hero with the M mark on his head for the mark of the Majin, back to a hero. He's a full-fledged hero at that point, because he's fighting Goku in their battle, which takes place, if I remember right, exactly 200 episodes later or it's 150 episodes or something like that, somewhere around there. 100 some episodes later from their first initial battle. In Dragon Ball Z. And then he knocks out Goku, knocks out Trunks, his son, knocks out Goten, Goku's second son at that, and then sacrifices himself, all to protect Bulma and Trunks, his son and his wife. And that, again, that music that's played is epic music. Like, you cannot just cut out good music like that. You have to use, either the original music or do a remastered rescore of the music that was used. Bruce Falconer did an amazing job.
Yeah, and I feel like bringing him back into the project would be probably something that'd be really cool, because, like, again, that's a big part of Dragon Ball. And in movies too, music and soundtracks are very big. You look at, like, Dark Knight Rises, any like pre-MCU Marvel movie, early MCU Marvel movies. You have, like, movies like Band of Brothers. The soundtracks are phenomenal and they evoke emotion. And, like, when it comes to, like, Vegeta sacrificing himself, or, like, the heroes are about to die or about to fail, that I think would be able to tell the story just a little bit more. You know what I mean? Like you were saying.
100%, yeah.
And that's actually a really good thought that I didn't even think of,
And another prime example of music that could be used, it could be the opening, Rock the Dragon. That was the opening for Dragon Ball Z when it first aired in the US, before it turned into when the orange box sets started coming out, the ones that you and I used to collect of the seasons, which I have all 9 of those, and I thought of bringing them out, but I was like, I got them tucked away, organized, and stored. I'm going to keep those tucked away, organized, and stored. But when Dragon Ball Z first aired in the US, they used Rock the Dragon, such an iconic song that could essentially be the opening theme song for the live action. It doesn't have to be, shot for shot the original opening. Or even better, you could have it be like the anime, and then all of a sudden there's, like, the shimmer, and it turns into a live action version of Shenron with the animals that surround him in the beginning, if you've ever seen it. They could turn the original opening into a live action opening, right, using Rock the Dragon, and that would bring up a lot of people's subsets of the show. It would make them be like, oh, well, they used such an iconic song from the series that was made specifically for this series, and they would probably have more openness to it, because they're like, oh my gosh, like, if the opening's that good with Rock the Dragon, maybe this could actually be good, and
100%.
You could start with a pilot. That's what most shows do. They start with a pilot episode, especially stuff that uses, like, actors, actresses, stunt doubles, everything else in between. They start with
test the waters,
screen test it, exactly. And if people, and don't have it be people who don't know of the material. Have it be people who do know the material, right?
Who are fans, who are like diehard fans.
Yeah.
Because that's the thing with Star Wars. If the sequel trilogies were made by people that actually cared about Star Wars, we wouldn't have gotten the dumpster fire that was, what was his name? Freaking, not J.J. Abrams. J.J. Abrams did an excellent job, I think, for what he could. But what was the last guy? Anyway, the last guy, he's so forgettable, his directing.
All I know is that I feel like George Lucas shouldn't have sold Star Wars to Disney, and that I think that's where a lot of fans started getting upset of the original trilogy and the prequel trilogy, is that there was George Lucas had no creative control over it, and that's why we had what we had for the sequel trilogy with Rey. I feel like the character could have been brought in a different direction had George Lucas been the one to uphold the casting and the story direction. Because I think if I remember right, he had said it himself too, that there had been no, like, Disney did not contact him about anything, and they didn't use what he had left for them, essentially. Like, he had left the sequel trilogy for them to use, and they completely flipped it 180 degrees.
100%. And you have people like Kathleen Kennedy that don't know what they're doing, and didn't, the smart thing would be to go to the guy who created the whole damn, and this could be a whole nother podcast in itself that we could talk about what it would take to get Star Wars back on track. Because I think these shows aren't doing Star Wars justice, and we're holding on to the characters that we've seen for too much, and we're pumping out too much material. Like, give them a break. Their stories has been told, you know what I mean? But I think, again, going back to the Dragon Ball, I think if we had directors, writers, everybody who was just super fans of it, who were it was a passion project, I think it would elevate the idea of it much more. People would actually take it seriously. I feel like actors who are actually martial artists and fitness enthusiasts, and people who are interested in telling the story of Goku and or Vegeta or Trunks or whoever it may be, or Cell, right? I have a few fan castings that I kind of thought of, but to me, I don't know. I feel like that would be phenomenal just to see, because again, so many people play your Batman. So many people are playing Spider-Man now. So many people are playing your superheroes. And when we get them recasted, usually it takes a little bit lukewarm. But I feel like with Dragon Ball, it'd be so divisive. You'd have to cast it great. And if they didn't have experience or they weren't super fans, it'd have to be a really, really good choice. Or they'd have to be a side character. Like for me, I don't know if you know Bobby Lee. He's a comedian. He's fucking hilarious. He's an Asian comedian. I feel like he would play a perfect Yajirobe. He is literally, if Yajirobe's a real person, that's who he is. He is fucking hilarious.
I'd have to look him up.
Yeah.
But that if he's a fan of it and he knows of Yajirobe, right? And he can pull out his mannerisms very well. I feel like then it might be like a great, cast. Like Yajirobe in Dragon Ball, he put on a bit of a brave facade, and that was his character. But when it came to Dragon Ball Z, he was more of a scaredy cat, and he tended to have more of like a glass half empty type look at life. Like if you recall when the characters right after Vegeta left, they brought, they went back to the original battlefield where Nappa and Vegeta first started fighting everyone. They got their bodies and they're in the car and they're trying to talk about how they're going to get to Namek. And they're talking with King Kai, who's a character that we'll have to talk about in a few minutes, is King Kai.
Yeah.
But, Yajirobe's kind of sitting there, and when King Kai's telling them planet Namek was wiped out, there's no more Namekians, Yajirobe's just they're picking his nose with his finger. He's like, well, that's it, game over. We can't, there's nothing that we're going to be able to do now. And that plays such a pivotal role because it's meant to try to downcast the hope that they're building.
Yeah.
And you have to have someone who can be sarcastic and condescending like that.
Oh yeah. Bobby Lee is hilarious. When I tell you he could, if you ever listen to his podcast, he's like a stand-up comedian. He did some acting and stuff like that. And he, when I tell you, he would, he is literally real world Yajirobe. He is just kind of dark like that, kind of fucked up. But and then he's the guy that you'd think be picking in his nose in his corner and say that, and then just if you were to see him, he has a mullet, he has a mustache.
Oh my god, then that'd be perfect because Yajirobe has that mullet esque hairstyle. It's like
Yeah.
very short in the front, as they like to say, business in the front, party in the back,
Yeah.
And I feel if that is the case, then that would be perfect because Yajirobe has that short hair in front, but it's more longer in the back,
Yeah.
and everyone knows he's like chubby and he tends to be like like if you ever seen him, he runs with his arms out and he kind of has like his feet are going like 100 miles
Yeah.
a minute in the anime. And I feel like that's something that you have to like remember.
Yeah.
Now, if we're talking fan castings, I want to hear some. If I recognize them, I'll be like, oh my gosh, like that's perfect. Like, who would you like? You have a fan cast probably for Goku. So who would you have play Goku?
Hold on, I got to look up his name real quick.
And the like I stated in the beginning when we first started talking, casting is such a huge important piece.
100%.
And they have to be able to know the material. They have to be able to bring out that emotion, right? We know Goku in the very beginning of Dragon Ball Z was very, very serious, and he had a very calm tone, especially when it came to the Cell Saga. Like there's one moment when Goku and Gohan first come out of the hyperbolic time chamber, and they're literally standing there they mastered Super Saiyan. And Goku he's talking and he asked Mr. Popo, he's like, did you have these washed as he's putting on his bands? And Mr. Popo's like, yeah, I did. And Goku's like, great, I love it. He's just so calm. And that's a side of Goku that you don't see that often, especially when it comes to the world, hanging on a death match, essentially he's just so calm. And the people who are casted in this live action, they need to be able to have those same moments, the mountains and the valleys. Like, Sean Schemmel has his mountains and his valleys when it comes to him dubbing Goku and voicing him. Another moment that's a mountain for Sean Schemmel as his voice actor is in Dragon Ball Z Battle of Gods, when Beerus is first introduced to us, before Dragon Ball Super came about.
Mhm.
And there's a moment that I recall perfectly. It's Goku just essentially sideswipes Beerus with a hit, and Beerus starts throwing all these like ki blasts around and is destroying the rocks. They're underground, and Goku just gets absolutely swallowed by these rocks. And all of a sudden, he goes like, "Ah!" He does this like guttural yell, and he's like, "I will not let you destroy my world." And that was like you can feel the rage inside you at that moment that Goku has. You can feel it inside you, and you can sympathize with him because he's like, oh my gosh, my world's about to be destroyed if I don't do something about it. And that's a mountain for Sean Schemmel. Like, I remember seeing the behind the scenes voice recording of it. His face got like really red, and he even told like the people that were watching him recording, he's like, I need a minute, like I'm about to pass out. And that's
the dedication.
It's on YouTube. You can see it for yourself. Like, it's all the voice actors. And Sean Schemmel standing there, and he's like, I need a minute after that, because that's how much emotion he puts into voicing the character. And that's what these actors understand, is we're looking for the emotion as well. And when it comes to a live action, is we need to see that emotion that Sean Schemmel put into a character like Goku, and we need to be able to sympathize with him. And I feel like that's where, casting is going to need that spark.
Yeah, definitely. I think someone who could definitely play, well, I don't know. So I feel like for Cell, I think each version would have to be a different actor. I think first form, he's just too creepy, too skinny, and has a different demeanor than second form Cell, and then from second form to like perfect Cell and second form Cell are nothing alike. So I feel like you need three actors pretty much.
I agree with you on that.
I think Frieza though. So the actor Bill Skarsgård, he played Pennywise. I feel like he would be perfect for Frieza. Just his face, the way, because Frieza does tell a lot of emotion like that. But I feel like because Pennywise was very like almost like that, where he had that same character act where he was very not childish and spoiled, but it was like when it was a manipulation game, it was a psychological game, it was that like power play, you know what I mean? That, and then at the end, and then in the second movie of it, when they beat him, it kind of like changed how he got very angry and upset. And I feel like he'd be able to do Frieza very well with the face. And if they had makeup or CGI or whatever it was, it would look phenomenal with how his acting goes.
Yeah, 100%. And even that, like, kind of touching base upon how they bring certain things to life when it comes to video games.
Yeah.
Motion capture is becoming huge now for video games. And it doesn't require the characters to wear a lot of makeup. And I feel like that's something that could be used in a live action Dragon Ball Z. Is motion capture. Because you can have the characters in their green screen suits or whatever, and they could essentially, just slap on the CGI, special effects or whatever, and make the characters come to life as they are. They could follow the source material and the designs that they have and essentially bring them to life with motion capture.
100%.
Bill Skarsgård could be perfect. I feel like, he could start off by like on his knees playing first form Frieza, but then standing up when it comes to second form Frieza. Because I feel like that was, in my eyes, second form Frieza was the most terrifying because, again, the grim nature of it. He stabs Krillin in the stomach with one of his horns, and if you watch that part, because that's in season 3 of the Orange box sets. And Frieza is literally saying in a dark, raspy voice, "Giddy up, cowboy, ride him and rack him," right? And he's literally like throwing his head back and is essentially puncturing Krillin more because as he's rocking his head, Krillin is falling deeper, further and further down onto the horn. And then you have the blood that trails down the horn. And Frieza, it drops on his face, and Frieza literally goes, and he's like licking it up and like eating it, and that's terrifying to watch.
Yeah, it's crazy.
But that's that emotion that we need, right? Because we at that point we're thinking, oh my gosh, Krillin's dead again because he died in Dragon Ball due to what was it? I think it was Tambourine is who he died to, and he you think he's gonna die again to Frieza, which does happen, but later on, which draws out the Super Saiyan in Goku, which draws out that state. But then you think he's gonna die, but then all of a sudden, literally an episode or 2 later, when Frieza's about to kill Gohan, Krillin's like, psych, and he throws the Destructo Disc, cuts his tail, and Frieza's pissed essentially at that point because he's like, I fucking killed you, and you're alive again? Yeah. So it's the motion and the storytelling, the casting, the music, that's what's going to allow us fans to have such a service. Like the people who created the One Piece live action, they serviced the fans with what they did.
Yeah.
With a Dragon Ball Z live action, because it has a much bigger fan base than One Piece, the fans are really going to need a huge service. And if you disservice them, they're going to shut down that project faster than you can say, but wait, we have bigger plans for it. It's going to get shut down very, very quick.
100%. Yeah. Yeah. I that's the biggest thing too, is like, cause that's the whole point of why they would be doing this, is to really like give the fans that nostalgia, what they enjoyed about the show originally when they watched it as kids or when they rewatched or whatever it is, or what we love about the main series. You want to reiterate that in whatever story or saga or season that would be decided to be told by a show, right? At least first off, in the beginning, that to me, like you said it perfectly, it needs to be service to the fans. It needs to be focused on the fans, because at the end of the day, they're going to be the ones that would go see it in the theaters or would watch it on Netflix or whatever, platform would be on, kind of thing. And I think it would need like top tier actors who have that ability to express emotion and express the anger and the yelling in a way that's not, because Dragon Ball can be over the top with that, and it works for the cartoon, it works for the anime. But I think in live action, it would take a highly skilled actor to be able to express immense emotion in a potentially, like, it's hard to believe, like, real world, like, how many times, there's never been a time where, like, androids have destroyed the world yet. You know what I mean? Like, Frieza's not a real thing. So it'd be very hard to, like, if the actor didn't believe that, the actors didn't believe that, and the cast didn't believe that, and weren't able to express their emotion, anger, and the ability to fight. And that's why I think them having a history with martial arts would be efficient too, because they'll have the strategy and the technique, but then we all know, like, when we're having a bad day, like, I don't know, when I started boxing and I was having a bad day, I'd go to the bag and throw some punches and stuff, and I'm sure you've had the same thing where you go a little bit harder, and I feel like they would understand that, so they'd be able to implement that into the storytelling, you know what I mean?
Oh yeah, 100%. And kind of doubling back a little bit to the fan service, another show that you and I know I watched it, I don't know if you did, that was turned into live action, Avatar: The Last Airbender.
Oh, that was terrible.
The movie, listen, M. Night Shyamalan is a great director, don't get me wrong, but the approach he took with turning that into a live action movie was, and when I'm saying this because I was younger, my opinions did not matter that much when I was younger, right? But I loved the movie when I first watched it. Going back and rewatching it later in life and realizing that they messed up on so many accounts is immense. Let's start off with the fact that Sokka and Katara are supposed to have more of like a olive skin, right? They're supposed to have darker skin, and that it was evident in the show that they were darker, that they had a darker tone to their skin, right?
Yeah.
They casted people who are white to play Sokka and Katara, right? Don't get me wrong, they probably could have done better, but maybe the actors did better with their auditions. Okay. So that's like the main aspect, right? But like the scar for Zuko, if I can recall, it's hard to tell, but I think it's supposed to be on his left eye. His scar, right?
Mm-hmm.
In the movie, it was on his right eye 85% of the time, and I think there was one instance where they messed up and put it in the correct spot, but then it went back to his right eye.
Yeah.
Immediately, you're already doing the fans a disservice because everyone knows that the scar is supposed to be on the left side.
Yeah.
Right. Let's see. Another instance was the whole earthbending village scene, right? When Aang first reveals himself to be the avatar to the village because it's taken over by the Fire Nation.
Yeah.
Right. I think a lot of people had misconceptions because I think they feel like we were being introduced to Toph, even though there was clear intentions that they were going to make a second movie where they would introduce Toph the right way. However, they had a little child who we thought was going to be Toph. And I think that was like another mistake that they had made was they were almost introducing a character that we didn't see until essentially what was season 2 in the show.
Yeah.
Another mistake was that they casted people who were Indian as, and I'm not trying to be racist here when I say this 100%. You know me, that's not my gig.
Yeah.
And I'm not like that. But they casted people who were Indian to play, the Fire Nation characters,
which have come across as either like some sort of like North Asian or like even white. Like they come across as kind of like a more Caucasian. And again, race isn't that big of a deal because I think it was Dev Patel who played Zuko, who's a brilliant actor. Like he's probably a really excellent actor. I'm surprised he hasn't been in more movies. But again, it was kind of like weird. It just didn't feel like that was Zuko or Iroh or any of anybody.
And I feel like that's where Netflix is learning from the mistakes that M. Night Shyamalan made, because now you have people who are actually hyped to see a live action Avatar because they're like, Aang's outfit is crucial to the show. Like, he has the yellow pants with I think it was like an orange like shawl or whatever on the top of his body. He has the yellow shirt underneath, right? And if you've seen the pictures from the live action Avatar: The Last Airbender from Netflix, is they have that outfit. The outfits, fit Sokka and Katara's outfits, and they look closely related to the source material, the original show. So already the fans are getting a service just from what has been revealed so far. Even the trailer, which I think came out in like late or early December for the show, is following the source material. And that's where, M. Night Shyamalan went wrong, is he tweaked the source material a little bit. His casting was a little messy, and that's where the fans started getting upset. And again, it also could be because CGI was not great in the early 2010s. Like with Dragon Ball Evolution, that came out in 2009. CGI probably
Yeah.
wasn't great. There was probably a little budget for it, and that's what caused Dragon Ball Evolution to be the way it was.
Yeah.
And with Avatar now, you have better CGI, better animation, right? They could essentially make the bending better than it was in Avatar: The Last Airbender, the movie that M. Night Shyamalan made. It's a lot of aspects that people need to be careful of, right? You need to have a director who knows the material well. And I feel like if you get that kind of director for a live action Dragon Ball Z, he could bring a service to the fans, and that's where it's going to succeed.
100. Yes. And I think they'd have to be passionate about it, because like you can't I don't know, you can't be a good director and understand the story, because you ultimately what you're trying to do is you have to understand what's happening in the story, and you have to understand how you're going to portray that through the music, through the actors, through whatever it is, right? Through whatever avenues, and then how it all comes together at the end. There's like multiple facets to being a director. So they have to be an excellent director. But again, yeah, they should be extremely passionate about the project, because I mean, we even saw it with I don't know. I feel like Hollywood as a whole does this, but they'll like have passionate actors or passionate directors who take on like Sam Raimi's Spider-Man, and then Spider-Man 3. They were trying to push down like all these different characters, and that's why we got such a crazy. I mean, I love the movie, but like it wasn't like something that could have been phenomenal. And then you have actors who have no place in telling that story. Maybe they're an excellent, not actor, excuse me, director. You have a director that maybe is great, but they have no place in telling the story of what they're doing. And it just seems like it's either a money thing or some sort of like, there's no like common sense behind it. Because there's a lot of fan films that have come out for many different projects in the past few years that are even better than what are these big Hollywood productions are doing. And I think Netflix is doing it right when it comes to their anime live actions. Or Avatar wasn't really technically, I don't know, is a cartoon, but there's cartoon to live action transformations. Yeah. I think Netflix has got down pat, because again, Alita Battle Angel, I don't think that was Netflix, but I think she would that movie was
a movie.
Yeah, but that movie was kind of a test pilot to see if it was even possible, because I think Alita Battle Angel was an anime originally.
I believe it was. I honestly don't remember. Bear in mind too, like my anime knowledge isn't as great as others. Like other people who watch all the other vast animes, like Attack on Titan, Haiku, I think is the one with the volleyball, My Hero Academia, Naruto, some of the more lesser known animes that are starting to come to, popularity. Like Sailor Moon is another anime that has come into popularity very much recently.
Yeah.
They understand the material very well. And I feel like following your material, right, especially if it has a manga to it, is going to be your best bet.
Yeah,
right.
100,
Like that.
Yeah.
That's why Dragon Ball Z has filler arcs. Like there's the Garlic Jr. saga. It's a filler arc between the main story. Right. This happens like right after Goku essentially defeats Frieza, and the Namekians left the Earth to go to New Namek. Right. Garlic Jr. comes in from the Dead Zone, and he turns all the humans on Earth into his slaves. But the only three that survive, that don't fall under it, are Gohan, Krillin, and Piccolo. And that was essentially a test for where Gohan could start going into the phase of the main character. He starts phasing in, right? But that whole saga has no manga arc, hence why it's called filler, right? Another thing that fans don't really consider, canon to the story is Dragon Ball GT, which I know you love. You love Dragon Ball GT, but I personally don't like it because of the fact that there's no. I know it shouldn't be the whole basis of why I don't like it, but there's no manga to it. It's all original content, and Akira Toriyama he played no part in it. He essentially said, I can't remember who it was, but he essentially told the person who created Dragon Ball GT, "Here, you do whatever you want with it. I'm not going to play a part in it, and we'll see what happens." And that's why a lot of fans don't like Dragon Ball GT, is because Akira Toriyama had no say in it. and he let other people play with it. It's an original story. That's why the fans don't like it. If there was a manga to it and a more decent, like, Dragon Ball GT is essentially a retelling of the beginning, Dragon Ball. Because Goku's a kid again. You have Pan, who plays Bulma, who's the damsel in distress. You have Trunks, who's essentially Yamcha / Krillin, who's the secondary hero to Goku. Because that's essentially what Yamcha is. He's a secondary hero until he becomes a running gag of the series, right? Like, his first instance is when Piccolo Jr. comes into play in the martial arts tournament. Yamcha gets eliminated by him by landing on top of essentially who was Kami, right? He lands on top of Kami and on his elbow, on his crotch. And at that point, Yamcha is going to turn into a gag character.
Yeah.
And that's what GT is it's essentially a retelling of Dragon Ball. And I feel like that's where a lot of fans get upset. And that's why I'm worried I'm not sure if you've heard, but they announced a new anime called Dragon Ball Daima or whatever. I don't know how it's pronounced.
Yeah.
But it's all original content. It's an original story and all the characters are turned to kids again. And I'm sitting here and I'm worried for it because I'm worried. I'm excited for it, but I'm worried at the same time because with having all the characters as kids, what kind of a story are you going to produce? Not only that, but it's coming into play, if I can recall, before Dragon Ball Super. So Beerus is not going to play. There's going to be no Beerus or mention. There's going to be no mention of Beerus or Whis. Dragon Ball or Super Saiyan Blue, which is essentially Super Saiyan God in a Super Saiyan state, is not going to be existent. Super Saiyan God is not going to have a mention. Neither is Mastered Ultra Instinct or Ultra Instinct for that matter. So there's not going to be any mentions of all that from Dragon Ball Super. And that's why crazy. That's why I'm like a little bit like, how is this going to play out?
Yeah.
So it's a waiting game because I don't think the anime is supposed to come out until like 2025 or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, by that time it could get scrapped completely or completely changed too. So we don't even know, I guess.
Yeah.
Oh, hey, buddy, you want to say hi? You want to say hi to everybody? Say hi?
Yeah, I got Benji in my room, and I'm starting to whine, so I think he's got to go, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. All right. Well, I want to thank all the viewers for listening. This has been the Absolutely Cosmic Podcast. Again, we're distributing short form and long form content between 14 different platforms. We post podcasts every Monday by midnight, so you will be able to watch content weekly. And we're working on projects for the YouTube channel to have more videos posted weekly later in the week, hopefully at some point soon. So again, I want to thank you for listening. Zach, thank you for coming on. And this has been the Absolutely Cosmic Podcast.
Listen, thank you for having me. Like, whatever tips you can give me, because I'm thinking of starting my own podcast with some of
do it
with some of my school buddies when it comes to learning how to be a teacher and like what things to expect, especially because like in the fall, hopefully I should have like a full-on like teaching job. I'm definitely going to be looking for some tips.
Yeah, 100%. I can help set you up when hopefully by then. The hardest part, I think, is just deciding whether you want to do it in person. Oh, what?
Probably the setup and the recording, right? That's probably like the hardest. And
deciding if you want to do it like, digital or in person. A lot of people, I think in person's cool, but I feel like digital allows you to, like, if you had a guest from cross country, you know what I mean? You could have them on.
100%.
Hell yeah. So yeah, I will do. But thanks for coming on, Zach. Thanks everybody for listening.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely Cosmic Podcast. You're welcome. All right. Peace, guys.
Thank you for listening. Consider absolutely smashing the subscribe button for more content like this.